It's a new era in Locked On Hoosiers, and what better way to do it than with Hoosier Hysteria in the basketball season right around the corner.
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. It is the Locked On Hoosiers podcast. I'm your new host, Jacob Goins, replacing Jacob Rude. That's right. I know he told you that he was leaving the Locked On Hoosiers podcast and that a new Jacob was taking over. I know it's been a couple of weeks, but I have officially taken over. And so really excited to be here. I do appreciate you making the Locked On Hoosiers podcast your first listen every single day up to this point, and I really do hope that you continue to make it your first listen each and every day. Of course, we are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every single day. And before I tell you about myself a little bit and we get into some really, really good content, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Be sure you go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy with Prize Picks. Well, my name is Jacob Goins. As I mentioned, Jacob Rude no longer here. I appreciate everything he's done for this podcast. And from what I can tell, it seems like you, the fans, are really, really passionate about this podcast. And one thing I know, you are passionate about Indiana athletics. And so for myself, quickly, I grew up in Ohio. And so I know about Indiana, and I know what it means to be an Indiana Hoosier. I know how passionate Indiana fans are and how serious you all take Indiana basketball in particular, but Indiana sports in general. And so I'm excited for this opportunity. I'm very thankful to Locked On. I'm very thankful to everybody at the Locked On Podcasting Network, Zach Blackerby, who is over the college channel, host of Locked On Auburn. Just everybody that has made this process extremely easy and such a seamless transition, I hope, for everybody at Locked On and hopefully for you, the listener. And so I am actually based in Auburn, Alabama. Crazy as it is, I know, but I am based down here in Auburn, Alabama, and I'm in sports talk radio. I host a daily show on ESPN 106.7 here in Auburn, covering the Auburn Tigers. And so I know what it means to cover a team each and every day, and I'm excited to take over this. I'm excited to talk about Indiana, and what better time to do it than right now, because Indiana basketball is right around the corner, folks. We are 16 days away from the start of Indiana basketball, and we had Hoosier Hysteria this past weekend. And so that's where we are going to start today, is talking about some takeaways from Hoosier Hysteria. The biggest one for me, before we talk about the players and kind of what we saw from the game, right? It wasn't fully a game. It was more of a glorified practice, glorified scrimmage. It's a fan event, which I think is always really, really cool. And I'm glad that Indiana does that. But the biggest thing that I took away from this, ladies and gentlemen, was Mike Woodson, the head coach of the Indiana Hoosiers men's basketball team. This guy loves Indiana basketball. I mean, he is what it means to be an Indiana Hoosier. And he was talking to the fans that were there present in Assembly Hall. And he was just talking about what it meant to him to be an Indiana Hoosier and what it meant to him to be coaching Indiana. And if that doesn't get you fired up for the season, if that doesn't get you fired up to support him as your head coach and support this Indiana basketball program, a team that made it to the NCAA tournament last year and a team that has a lot of talent on this year's roster, if those things don't get you excited, I don't know what will. And so I really like Mike Woodson and what he's done so far. I know there are some fans who maybe aren't as excited or maybe aren't on him just yet and wanting more results compared to what other big name programs are doing in college basketball. And I get it. I absolutely get that. But Mike Woodson is the guy for the job. In my humble opinion, watching Indiana over the last couple of years, and of course now really diving into this thing, I like Mike Woodson as the head coach. And so besides that, what did we see from Hoosier Hysteria? Well, we saw some three-point shooting in the three-point contest, right? No real game action was played, right? Nothing crazy in the aspect of 5-on-5s or anything like that. But you saw really good three-point shooting. And for a team in Indiana that shot 37% from three last year, which is not bad by any means in college basketball, it's not bad, not great, but not bad. That's what you want to see from this team. And to highlight a couple of guys, freshman Gabe Cups and the sophomore Yarden Garzon both had 19 of 25 in the three-point contest. It's pretty good to me. Let's just be honest. That's really, really good. They are uncontested, right? It is an open gym. It's like shooting at practice. But the guys that have the ability to at least shoot the basketball is really, really important. Look around college basketball at times. Teams that can't shoot don't win. Believe me, I watched it with Auburn last year right here in this town. A team that can't shoot, you're going to get burned. And so to have a freshman that comes in that is able to shoot the basketball like that, that's a really, really big strength. And so hopefully you want that to kind of carry over, right? You had 3-point contest champions in the Hoosier Hysteria. It's just it's exciting time, I think, for this Indiana basketball team. Excitement on offense is what this team needs. And if you can get it from behind the 3-point line, you're never really out of a game. And that's what's important when it comes down to when you're in the middle of Big Ten play, when you're getting into the Big Ten tournament, when you're getting into the NCAA tournament, right? When you have 3-point shooting, you're never truly out of a game. And so that was the biggest takeaway from me was 3-point shooting. Seemed like nobody has been really hurt, which is always good and always a risk when you are doing things like this. And I think that's probably why head coach Mike Woodson and the women's team was there as well, which is really, really exciting too. And I'm glad both programs got the opportunity to play in front of the fans. But being able to stay healthy and things like this and be at your best to start the season, that is a massive, massive blessing. And so we'll find out. We'll see. I think Hoosier Hysteria is a lot of fun. I know you've got the Big Blue Madness or whatever they call it over there in Lexington, but we don't care. We have Hoosier Hysteria. It happened over the weekend, and that really is the sign that college basketball is right around the corner. And we are going to be 15 days away by the time this is coming out for you to listen to and watch on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. 15 days away from Indiana basketball. Are you kidding me? November 7th will be the start. I'm excited. I know you are as well. With all of this excitement, though, we do have to cover some news that is not so exciting, with some freshman news that came in just less than 24 hours ago with a 5-star freshman on the roster. We're going to talk about that coming up next here on Locked On Hoosiers. But first, I want to shout out our wonderful sponsor today, who is the reason we are here. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at the Athletic Brewing Company. And folks, let me tell you about this Athletic Brewing Company. Learning about them, I've heard of them, right? I've heard of them before I became here in Locked On. But now that I'm here and I'm really reading up on what they're doing, they've got it going on over there at the Athletic Brewing Company. What they do is they've completely changed the game in the non-alcoholic beers, okay? They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good, right? Full of flavor, well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. And this is not your non-alcoholic beer where they take the alcohol away, but they also take the flavor away. No, they are full of flavor. They win competitions. They're award-winning. They're beating out alcoholic beverages, but it's non-alcoholic. Perfect for Indiana football games on Saturdays as we're about halfway through the season. Indiana basketball coming up. Hey, Maybe you want to enjoy a couple of drinks on one of those Tuesday or Wednesday nights when Indiana basketball is playing, but you got to go to work the next day. Instead of drinking something else and feeling groggy the next day, check out the Athletic Brewing Company. You can find their non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewingcompany.com. First-time customers can use the code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. That's athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Well, let's talk a little bit more Indiana basketball, because with all of that good news, we got some bad news last night. Yesterday morning on Sunday, we got some not so great news as five-star freshman Mackenzie Mgbako was arrested, unfortunately. And here's what we know, okay? Here's what we know. He was arrested on 2 misdemeanor charges, and misdemeanor charges on 2 Class A misdemeanor charges. And I want to read you the statement from the Bloomington Police Department. He was booked at 3:16 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday morning with criminal trespass and resisting law enforcement, according to Monroe County jail records. He has since been released. So here's what Indiana had to say, and then here's what the Bloomington Police Department had to say. Indiana says, IU Athletics is aware of the situation, an IU spokesperson told HoosiersNow.com. We will continue to gather facts, cooperate with and monitor the legal process, and take further action as the evolving situation warrants. Of course, he is a 5-star freshman. He committed to Indiana back in May, chose the Hoosiers over Kansas. I believe he decommitted from Duke. And so big name programs were in this thing, and he chose Indiana to eventually come and be on campus. He's been with the team. He's been practicing. A lot of expectations on this 5-star freshman, and being in trouble off the floor, it's just stuff you have to deal with sometimes, right? We hope the best, okay? We all hope the best. Here's what the statement that was released, and it's a long statement. I'm not going to read all of it, but it says, quote, this is from the Bloomington Police Department, Captain Ryan Padigo, okay? It says, quote, on October 22nd at approximately 2:15 a.m., officers responded to Taco Bell, located at 3001 East 3rd Street, in reference to a man refusing to leave the property. Upon arrival, officers were advised by Taco Bell management that they were refusing service to the man in a vehicle in the drive-thru due to him cursing at and being rude to employees. Officers made contact with the man, who refused to identify himself but told officers that he was 18 years old. The man was later identified as Mackenzie Mgbako. Officers asked him to move his vehicle from the drive-thru lane, which he agreed to do, and move the vehicle into a parking space. Upon further management, they requested more officers, said he needed to leave the property. He reversed his vehicle, coming back into the Taco Bell lot after he tried to leave. Just sounds like it was a disaster, right? Just sounds like this was an event where late at night, you never know what's going on. Again, young 18-year-old kid, you never know what's happening. He was arrested. He was then released on 2 Class A misdemeanor charges. What does all of this mean? Well, at the forefront, it doesn't sound all that bad, right? Just sounds like he was caught there and was maybe being just being a pest. I don't know, being annoying, right? Just kind of wanting whatever he wanted, right? At Taco Bell at 2:00 in the morning. But then when the cops show up and they ask you to leave, and you try to leave, and then you come back and you're just resisting arrest, eventually they're going to get fed up. And that seems to be what happened here. And now the 5-star freshman was arrested. He was then released. But again, the charges don't seem to be all that bad. Will this influence him playing in 15 days or so? I don't know. I think that's a really good question, and I'm sure it's something that head coach Mike Woodson is going to have to address. And Here's where this all sort of gets confusing, and this is where this gets real at the same time. Given what we've seen in college basketball over the last 12 months, off-court issues have to be handled in the right way. They absolutely have to be handled in the right way, because if not, there's multiple things that can happen. You can impact the individual player or players that are involved, right? With their mental status, with their performance on the court or on the field, whatever sport it is, right? You can affect that. You can also affect the mentality in your team and how they look at you as a head coach and a coaching staff if you don't handle it the right way. We've seen the biggest example of all of this was the Brandon Miller situation at Alabama with head coach Nate Oates. Now, these are two completely separate situations, and I think both of these are completely different when it comes to the level of, the level of crime, right? And the level of impact and what actually happened. These are two completely separate things. Let's just get that correct here. But that's the biggest example. And you remember how long that drug on and drug on and drug on, and the backlash that Alabama and Nate Oates and Alabama basketball, the athletic department, the university, the mud that they were drugged through for months and months and months because of how that situation was completely mishandled, in my opinion. So when stuff like this happens, when you have a player on your team who gets in trouble off the floor, you have to handle it the right way. Whether that is a suspension, whether it is a sprint at practice, I don't know. And the severity of the situation, I think, has a lot to do with that. It really, really does. I think it needs to be held and taken internally, needs to be handled internally until somebody else has to be involved, right? Because think about it. There's no reason for us to know anything about it until we have to. If the law has to be involved some more, then yeah, you handle it with them as well. But until then, handle it internally, take the precautionary action, and move on. Luckily, doesn't sound like anybody was hurt. Doesn't sound like anything really, really went wrong. Sounds like an 18-year-old just kind of got caught up in a bad situation, and hopefully everything works out for him, and everything hopefully works out for this Indiana basketball program, and it doesn't become too much of a distraction, and there's nothing lingering later on in the weeks to come. If he does not play starting out the season for whatever reason, I'm not saying he will, and I'm not saying he won't. I'm just saying if he doesn't play, at least it's early, right? At least it is early in the season. You have Florida Gulf Coast to start the year. And you do have some big games in non-con schedule, but at least it's not in March, and you're not having to deal with this in Big Ten play or approaching postseason play. So do I think that this will impact Indiana full term, long term? No, I don't. I don't think it will. I think he will be fine. I think Indiana will be fine, and we'll have to see what Mike Woodson decides to do. But I don't think it's going to be all that crazy. And I'm not super worried about it, to be completely honest with you. So I hate to see it, though. You really do hate to see it. It's a situation that basketball coaches are having to, they are having to deal with it day in and day out right now. So it is what it is. And that's just kind of where college basketball is right now. Want to remind you, though, before we get to our next segment, that college football season is here. And this season, Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live each Friday. Locked On will go live at 11 a.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, and go in depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it. Be sure that you check that out. They do a fantastic job with that. You don't want to miss it. It is where you want to be. It's the place to be, place to go. Fridays at 11 before football on Saturday. So be sure that you are checking that out. Today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Be sure you go and check them out. They do a fantastic job. It's the place to be if you want to get into daily fantasy. And so some of you may be asking, what is Prize Picks? Well, Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Some examples are Prize Picks is the most fun, right? It is super, super fun. If you are into daily fantasy, I like fantasy, and I'm getting more into the daily fantasy. For years, I've played just weekly fantasy, right? You get up on Sunday, set your lineup, and move on and forget about it. But I'm starting to get into the daily fantasy stuff. And once you do that, you have so many more options. It's quick. It's easy. It is super simple to play. I can make my picks when I've started doing it now. I make my picks and submit my entry in literally a minute, like 60 seconds, in and out, just like you did on Sundays, right? With your weekly lineup. This is your daily stuff that you can do with Prize Picks. 60 seconds in and out. It's just that easy. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. You have to try it out. I've started playing it. It's a lot of fun. It's almost addicting. So in a good way, though. It's very fun, and I really do enjoy it. And so be sure you go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Well, we've talked a little basketball here on Locked On Hoosiers, and I appreciate you making this your first listen each and every day. As we get closer to basketball season, it is still football season, and I don't want people to forget that. And while some of you may have forgotten about football season in Indiana, I have not, and hopefully you haven't. As the Hoosiers played over the weekend, they had a game against Rutgers, and a heartbreaker, I think, is the best way to put it. Really one of those games that you're just like, afterwards, you're like, man, Indiana could have won this game, right? Indiana had their chances. They had opportunities. They had a lead in this game, ladies and gentlemen. They had a lead in this football game, and they couldn't pull it out. They score first, right? They were up 7-0. Vibes are immaculate. Everything's going well. And then the blocked punt happens. And we're like, oh no, here it comes, right? Here it comes with Indiana. Here it comes. But Indiana responded, right? You score first. You have the blocked punt. Unfortunately, you had back-to-back 3-and-outs on offense. That doesn't really help. And the offense has been the issue all season. I have watched Indiana football. I've been keeping up with it. I've really dove into the stats and stuff now that I've taken over this podcast. And it's been the offense, man. And I don't have to tell you that. The listener, whether you're listening or watching, I don't have to tell you that the offense has been the issue. In Power 5 competition this year, Indiana has yet to score more than 20 points. That's not the winning way, man. That's not how you're going to win in Power 5 football. Most of the time, it's not how you're going to win in the Big Ten. Iowa would beg to differ. They could win games by a score 5-3, and they'll be fine with it. Their offensive coordinator may get fired, but they may be fine with it if they're winning football games. But more times than not, you cannot win games in Power 5 Big Ten football scoring less than 20 points. I always say my magic number is 24. 24 is the perfect number for me offensively and defensively If your defense can hold a team to less than 24 points, they have done their job, because an effective offense in college football should be able to score 24 points each and every time they step on the field. Well, that would mean that Indiana's offense is not an effective offense. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory on why. You've had injuries, you've had a slow start, you are playing some good defenses, but Rutgers was not a good defense. And a lot of times Indiana is just shooting themselves in the foot, right? You do come back and you tie the game, but then you give up a long drive to Rutgers to go down at the half. Then you're down by 10. It's 24-14. And you're thinking, okay, it's now or never for Indiana. Offense doesn't do anything. The offense stalls out. Bam, 80-yard touchdown run by Rutgers. And that was all she wrote. That was it. Once it was 24-10, that's where Indiana had to do something. The offense had to find a spark, had to find a way. The defense had done their job, and then you give up the big 80-yard score, and that's it. And that's it. That was all she wrote, and that's your final score of 31-14. Where does Indiana go from here? Well, it doesn't get a whole lot easier, because you have to play Penn State on the road in Happy Valley at 11 a.m. Then you have to play Wisconsin. Two teams that are really good defensively and give or take are good offensively. Penn State was good offensively until they played Ohio State. And maybe if you're Indiana, that gives you a little bit of confidence, maybe, right? Maybe gives you a little bit of confidence that your defense can hang around with Penn State coming up this weekend and watch the Ohio State film. Find any way to slow down that Penn State offense and give your offense, for the Hoosiers, a chance to do something. And I think, too, when you look at the end of that game against Rutgers, Indiana had a couple of long drives. They just didn't get any points off of it. And you can't do that. You've got to cash in when you go on those long drives. When you get into enemy territory, you have to get points. I don't care if it's field goals, man. For this Indiana offense, field goals are fine. Field goals are points, and points are better than nothing, because Indiana is desperate for points. And so take those, right? Take those possessions, take some of that. I think that's positivity. I think it's positive energy. It is, it's optimism, right? Maybe you can build off of that. Look at the film from Ohio State, Penn State, find a way for your defense to keep you in the ball game, and see if you can get that first Power 5 win, because you got to find a way. You got to find a way to get a win in the Big Ten. Whether it be on the road at Penn State, it's going to be tough. There's no doubt about it. You do have Wisconsin coming up. After that, that's not a very explosive offense, and that's been a very up and down year for Luke Fickell in year one. I think Indiana football can turn it around somewhere. If you can start scoring, Indiana's defense has proven they're good enough to keep them in games and win them games, but the offense has to score enough to win games as well. That's going to do it for our first episode here on Locked On Hoosiers. First episode with me, anyway. Jacob Goins taking over once again for Jacob Rude. I appreciate you all tuning into this first episode. I'm excited, man. If you can't tell already, I'm super, super excited. I'm very honored, very blessed to have another avenue, another opportunity to get my voice out there, reach a new audience. Please engage with me on Twitter. You can see it right there. Plug it, go to it, send me messages, like everything. Go and check out our Locked On Hoosiers Twitter as well at LO_Hoosiers. If you just look up Locked On Hoosiers on Twitter, you'll find it right there. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, download it on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. We are your first listen each and every day, and we do appreciate you for doing that. We'll be back tomorrow. We're here every day now. I know there was a little bit of a break, but we're here every day now. As basketball season approaches, we'll continue to preview that, and we'll continue talking Indiana football as the Penn State game approaches as well. I appreciate you. Stay safe. I'll talk to you later. Go Hoosiers, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow here on Locked On Hoosiers.